and USSR, Part 5. Hello comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka Show. Today I would like to tell you a little bit more about my grandparents on my mother's side that lived in the northern Ukraine, Chernigov region. My grandpa, Sergei Yefimovich, and my grandmother, Maria Ivanovna, they were both born in 1907 in the summer, and they had a little bit different backgrounds. My grandpa Sergei was born in the family of wealthy farmers, and wealthy in terms of life in Russia and Ukraine. They probably had a couple of horses, a small farm. But my grandma Maria, her mother passed away while giving her birth, and at the age of 5 her father died from the farm accident. Something happened, I don't remember what, but he I think was trampled by the horse while harvesting. So she was raised by her relatives, and she was very poor. They met sometimes around 1920s, probably middle of 20s, so they were about 20-year-old or something like that, at someone else's wedding. My grandpa was best friend, and she was the best friend on the bride's side, and that's how he saw her. My grandma Maria Ivanovna was extremely pretty, and he fell in love, and in a year or so he married her. They had a son, my uncle Mikhail, around the same time, around the middle of maybe in the beginning of 30s. And it's just Ukraine, a rich agricultural region. People were having good crops of potatoes and wheat, raised pigs and cows. So everything would be great, but unfortunately in 1927 Soviet government decided to start so-called collectivization, collectivization, which was the plan to unite small farmers and the big collective farms, so-called kolkhoz, and also Soviet farms, sovkhoz, and that way to increase agricultural production and help to finance massive industrialization. In 1932, collectivization came to Ukraine. Now, if you study history of Russian Revolution of 1917, there were several slogans that Bolsheviks were using, trying to attract support from the population. They had a slogan like "Заводы рабочим," so all the factories should be owned by workers, "Земля крестьянам," all the land to peasants, so the peasants should be owning the land, and "Peace for soldiers," so that means that we're gonna stop imperialistic war and start a peaceful building of new society. And in the end, there were the peasants who got the shortest end of the stick, because promising land to peasants, Soviets didn't really mean that every peasant would get land to farm on. The plan was to take everyone's land and combine it into collective farms, and that's where you can work. Collectivization came to Ukraine around 1932. I remember my grandpa's stories about how peasants were given two choices. You can bring your animals to collective farm and join the collective farm, or we'll take your animals and we'll send you to Siberia. So my grandpa ended up joining the collective farm. Now, before the revolution, Russia used to be a breadbasket of Europe. They were selling a lot of wheat, cereals, and other farm products to Western Europe. But after collectivization happened in Soviet Russia, suddenly we had a horrible shortage of food. Collective farms, kolkhozy, turn out to be extremely ineffective because, well, it's hard to convince somebody to work hard if they demand them to work for free and give away all the fruits of your labor. So the government ended up sending troops to the villages to confiscate the wheat, grains, anything they could find. They were taking everything, including the seeds for the next season. And even Ukraine, which has one of the best soil for growing crops, had a horrible hunger issue, and millions of Ukrainians perished in 1930s because all the food was taken away by Bolsheviks. Now, in my grandparents' village, no one died because people lived close to the river and to the woods, so they were mushroom hunting and fishing, and it helped them to survive without bread. And I remember my grandpa's story that he worked as a guard at the barn where there was the grain stored. So him and his brother were guarding the barn, and while one guy would be walking around with the rifle, his brother or my grandpa would go under the barn, because barns were built on the big brick pillars, which help to prevent from mice to get inside of the barn and eat the grains. So my grandpa would sneak under the barn and drill a tiny hole right under the spot where the grain is stored, and then that's why they would be quietly stealing grain. Then they put the wood peg in the hole to conceal that hole. So besides confiscating food from the people, government also forbade do things like fishing. Since everything was government owned, now government could tell you what can you do, you cannot do, and they didn't sell like fishing licenses. It's just fishing was forbidden. And sometimes it makes me wonder like why they created such policies, which pretty much was starving people on purpose. So what my grandparents did, and at that time my late uncle Misha was maybe like 3 or 4 year old baby, so they will go fishing at night. They will put Misha to sleep, and while he is asleep, my grandma would tie a rope to his leg and then to the bed leg. So in case if he wakes up in the middle of the night and finds no one home, that he won't wander out of the house and go to neighbors asking, do you know where my parents are? So that's how they made sure that the kid stays in the house, by tying his leg to the bed with the rope, and there they go fishing. And at night there was fishing with the fishing nets. So my grandpa will be on his boat using oar and dragging the net from the boat, while my grandma will be walking along the shore in the water like waist deep, sometimes deeper, up to your neck, dragging the net that way. And this way they'll be dragging the net in the middle of the night up and down the stream, trying to catch some fish so they can have something to eat tomorrow. So that's how the life went in the villages of Soviet Union. Government was stealing from peasants, then peasants were stealing back from the government. Meanwhile, everyone was showing how much they're excited about building communism. But at least no one died from starvation in our village up north. And a lot of it depends, of course, on the collective farm leader, so-called председатель колхоза. If he would be a real communist and constantly checking the people's houses with soldiers, then of course they can keep on confiscating all the food they can find, and people have hard time. But I guess in our village, a guy was pretty laid back, and he didn't give hard time to the other neighbors in the village. So that's how life of my grandparents was going in 1930s, and then in June of 1941, Germany attacked Soviet Union, and there was a totally different story after that. But that'll be the topic of my next video. Thank you very much. Goodbye.